For weeks now, we have been talking about women in Matthew's Gospel. 5 women specifically who were named in Jesus' genealogy: Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, and Mary. The first 4 of these ladies are depicted on the wall behind me. This theme that continues today is called From These Roots. And our theme that carried us through the Advent season and culminated on Christmas Eve with Mary, the mother of Jesus, will be part of this sermon today. And that's kind of confusing because we've already talked about these 5 ladies. So the question remains, now what? What do we do now that we have exhausted all 5 of these women mentioned in Matthew chapter 1? Should we talk about the 34 unmentioned mothers who also belong to Jesus' genealogy? I'll take that as a no. And maybe one heck no over here. But seriously, what more is there to talk about from these roots? Well, roots are just the beginning of a plant. We all know this. Roots are no doubt vital and provide sustenance and nutrients for life. All plants begin with roots. But the plant above the roots is the part that sees the sun. It rises above the earth and soaks in the sun's goodness. It dances in the light and turns the sun's light into energy and grows from it. So let's talk about the plant above the soil and unpack this exciting concept that John's Gospel spells out for us so beautifully. To begin, let me tell you about my failed garden experiment. Before Alpha and I got married, and I begin with that because I don't want Alpha to get a bad rap, I attempted to grow my own herb and vegetable garden. It seemed like a really good idea at the time. I brought out my trusty saw, hammer, and nails. I bought some boards from Lowe's, and I made 2 raised beds, which I filled with diatomaceous earth and bioorganic compost. I just like saying that. Diatomaceous earth and bioorganic compost. Impressed? You shouldn't be. That's just a fancy way for me to say I mixed up some clay and silica with cow manure. Cow manure apparently does great things for your garden. Needless to say, after making all that soil, I took a very long shower. And inside my garden boxes, I planted several types of herbs and vegetables. And although they all grew, I did not get much produce because bugs and pests got to everything, and they ate all of my plants before I could. I was so disappointed and upset. All of my hard work and labor was wasted on feeding grasshoppers, aphids, and snails. It was horrible and sad for me. But there was one thing in my yard that grew and grew and grew without any bug problems, and that was my grapevine. My grapevine grew like a weed and wrapped itself up around a tall trellis arch that stood in my backyard next to an orange tree. Now, if you've ever grown a grapevine before, then you probably know the problem that I experienced. Grapevines grow so vigorously and aggressively that mine took over its neighboring orange tree. The grapevine covered it with so many branches that you could no longer tell that a tree had stood there. So every week I had to break out my ladder, climb up the ladder, and prune back all of those vine branches because they grew and they grew and they grew. They grew in order to soak in the sun, turning the sun's light into energy. You probably know a little bit about where the sermon is heading because there was a clue in that last statement. Jesus said, "I am the vine and you are the branches." We know a lot about the roots of this vine from Pastor Mark's previous sermons. But what does it mean to be vine branches? To be the branches of Jesus' roots? Does it mean that we are to grow aggressive, unconcerned for others, and choke out our neighbors? Of course not. But some Christians have certainly grown aggressive, haven't they? Offering little or no regard for their neighbors, even choking out their neighbors by denying them inclusion into God's family. That's not the kind of plant Jesus wants us to be. Jesus describes for us a plant that we are to become if we are to be his branch. Instead of a vine that grows selfishly for its own purpose and benefit, Jesus describes us as a vine that grows to glorify God. "My Father is glorified by this," Jesus said, "that you bear much fruit and become my disciples." You see, throughout this passage, Jesus closely ties the fruit that we bear with discipleship. He said, just as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in me, the vine, neither can you bear fruit unless you abide in me. Those who abide in me and I in them will bear much fruit. If you keep my commandments, Jesus said, you will abide in my love. Abide, 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 abide. The word abide appears 11 times in these 11 verses. Nowhere else in Scripture is the word abide used so intensely than in this passage. Whenever we hear this passage read, it begins to sound like a broken record that skips on the word abide. So what does this word abide mean exactly? Well, the Greek word is meno, which can mean to obey, observe, follow, uphold, respect, heed, acknowledge, endure, take, and bear. When we abide in Jesus, we obey Jesus. We heed Jesus. We respect Jesus. We follow Jesus. And meno can also mean to stay or lodge, to remain, dwell, and live permanently, to be present with someone forever. So the word abide used by Jesus in our passage gives us a sense that we are to follow him persistently, forever and ever, to grow and grow and grow in him. When we abide in Jesus, we are inseparable from him, for you cannot have a branch without a vine. Well, you can't have a living branch without a vine. One commentator wrote that this meno, or abiding, means, quote, something has established itself within my soul and has exerted and always exerts power over me. Well, this definition helps us understand our eternal relationship with Jesus. Jesus is our true source of life. Without Jesus, we are cut off from the vine and we wither and die. The language in our text says thrown into the fire and burned. That sounds a lot worse than being eaten up by bugs. And when we abide and live with Jesus, we grow and we blossom. We fruit. And that's what life is about. We prosper. And let's be clear. Let's always remember, Jesus is talking about the fruit of discipleship here, not about earthly treasures or earthly fruit when he says, with him we bear fruit. Jesus keeps discipleship and the fact that we're bearing fruit closely connected. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love. Discipleship is what Jesus meant by bearing fruit. But the real beauty behind these words and this message from Jesus is that God makes it possible for even the unworthy branches to bear fruit. Listen again to verses 1 through 3. I am the true vine, Jesus says, and my Father is the vine grower. He removes every branch in me that bears no fruit. Every branch that bears fruit, he prunes, and to make it bear more fruit. You have already been cleansed by the words that I have spoken. You see, Jesus is the vine, and God is the gardener who tends to the vine, who nurtures it, who takes care of it, who ensures that the vine bears fruit. This imagery takes us back to the very beginning of life, to the Garden of Eden, where God created everything and nurtured it. In our Bible translation that Allison read for us, it says, God prunes. But the word prune can also be translated cleanse. So let's try that on for a moment and substitute cleanse for prune. God cleanses us so that we, his branches, can produce good fruit, the fruit of the discipleship. Now that, to me, sounds a lot more accurate. If cleanse is what Jesus meant, then this could be why in the very next sentence, Jesus says, you have been already cleansed by the words that I have spoken to you. Our cleansing has already happened. It's not something that we have to wait for. It's already happened to us. Because of Jesus, we have already been cleansed so that we may fulfill our purpose as vine branches and as Jesus' disciples. We don't have to worry about how we will become worthy or if we will become worthy, nor do we have to worry about making ourselves worthy. It's already happened to us. God has rid our lives of those pests that seek to devour us. God cleanses us. God purifies us because we are part of Jesus' vine. In fact, we are his branches. And along with all of creation, we are empowered to rise above the manure and all the dirt of this life, to bear fruit, to witness to that which gives us life, to Jesus, the true vine. In essence, we are the part of the plant that sees the sun, the part that soaks in the sun and transforms that sunlight into energy. We are the branches. You're a branch of Jesus Christ, and you're a branch of Jesus Christ, and all of you are branches of Christ to bear fruit. And this is not just true for those who have been here the longest. So if you just started attending St. Mark Church today, or if this is your first visit to St. Mark, well, welcome aboard. The good news is that you're a branch. You're a new leaf sprouting from this vine. Nor is being part of the vine only for those who paid for this beautiful, beautiful facility. If you're not rich, or you're unemployed, or you just can't afford because of financial struggles to make a large contribution, rest assured, you're a branch. And this message is not just only true for the so-called movers and shakers of our community. If you can barely move, or you're just learning how to shake, the good news is you're a branch too. So often, we feel like we are unworthy to be in this place, unworthy to sit next to so-and-so with the perfect life, unworthy to serve on a committee when we ourselves feel broken inside with nothing to give, unworthy to share our ideas or our thoughts or our gifts because we are not the right gender or the right race or the right class or the right height or the right anything. Have you ever felt unworthy? Let me make one thing crystal clear. Because if I don't get this across to you, then I have failed. You are not unworthy. You are worthy because you are part of the vine of Jesus. Let me say that a different way. Because you are part of Jesus, you are worthy. You are not unworthy. You are worthy. God prunes us. God cleanses us. God makes us worthy. We are His branches, not by our own doing. We are His branches, despite all of the sin and shortcomings that we have. We are His branches simply because of Jesus. The Christ that was born into this world has permanently established Himself in our souls and always exerts His redeeming love over us so that we may be His branches and produce good fruit. Jesus came from a very long line of heroic figures whose lives were full of brokenness and despair. They too did not feel worthy. And just as they were part of His roots, we too are part of His vine. We are part of His vine, a vine that can oftentimes look a mess, a vine that can sometimes choke out neighbors. But yet, we are part of the vine that comes from the stump of Jesse, a vine that never ever withers or dies, a vine that soaks in the sun and grows and grows and grows. A vine that produces fruit to feed this hungry and hurting world with justice, with faith, with compassion, with power, and of course, God's redeeming love. Today, know that your names are up on this wall. You're part of Jesus' branch, and that is something to celebrate. Amen.